Good day, race fans! I'm Unsilent, and we're on the air with the Formula One Drive-Thru Podcast. It's episode number 5, coming to you just hours after round number 5 of the 2017 Formula One World Championship, the Spanish Grand Prix, won by Lewis Hamilton, picking up his second win of the season. Lewis Drag Reduction Hamilton MBE. Yeah, I'm gonna get some complaints about that, but that's... You know what? There's the thing about this race is, one, Ferrari bollocksed up the strategy not once but twice during this race, and two, the action on track was exciting with the exception of that final pass for the win. I think that might have been the dullest battle in the entire race, but we will talk about that as we go along. Let's take a look at today's topics. As usual, the topics on screen are also in the description down below with timestamps, so if you want to go to a specific part of the broadcast, then you can go there now. We're going to start with the Spanish Grand Prix recap, as always. Then we're going to talk a little bit about upgrades. Mercedes came with a whole host of upgrades. Helped more with the practice pace than anything else, though. Honda's engines, oh boy, Honda's engines. They might have worked well for Fernando in the race, but oh boy, there's some horror stories coming out of McLaren about them. We'll also talk about Renault's engines. We've got a look at the 2018 driver market at the quarter-way mark of the season. And finally, Force India, we've been talking about their financial woes and the financial woes of their owners. Are they for sale, and who might buy them? But first, it's the Spanish Grand Prix and the Spanish Grand Prix recap. Let's take a look at the results. Lewis Hamilton wins his second race of the season, followed by Sebastian Vettel in second. Daniel Ricciardo rounded out the podium, and nobody else finished on the lead lap. It's amazing. It's like you've got Ferrari, Mercedes, okay, I guess Red Bull, and then everyone else. It's just there is such a gap between the top two and everyone else. And you can't even say it's just the engines because, okay, Mercedes had the Phase 2 engines, the second spec of the Mercedes 2017 engines, and none of the other Mercedes customer teams did. But at the same time, it's like, okay, they had this big upgrade, obviously helped them in the race. Perez and Ocon weren't even on the same lap, and they're the second best Mercedes team right now. Red Bull managed to finish with a car on the lead lap, but nowhere even close to the competition. So going through the rest of the results, Perez and Ocon, I don't know how they keep doing it. They just have a quiet race, stay out of trouble, and they make their way to 4th and 5th. Hülkenberg in 6th for Renault. Carlos Sainz in 7th, followed by Pascal Wehrlein scoring 4 points for Sauber, a much-needed 4 points that is almost certainly going to secure them, probably, 9th place in the World Constructors' Championship. Then you've got Danny Kvyat in 9th, and Romain Grosjean rounding out the points for the Haas Formula One team. Down below, you've got Alonso and Massa, who both started in the top 10. We'll talk about them. Down below, oh my goodness. There's some big names down the bottom, not classified. Bottas, Van Dorn, well, we'll talk about him briefly. Verstappen and Raikkonen. So let's get into the race. Race start. Oh boy, it all kicked off fast. Hamilton did not have a great start. Vettel managed to beat him down into turn 1, and then it all happened. Bottas, Verstappen, and Raikkonen tried to go 3 into 1 into turn 1. Bottas hit Raikkonen, who hit Verstappen, and those latter two were out instantly with suspension damage. Those two came back onto the track and right into the path of Felipe Massa, who's besides Fernando Alonso. Massa got a broken front wing, Alonso ended up in the gravel, and both of their races were severely compromised at that point, and they were out of contention. They were both looking like they were going to be strong contenders for points-paying positions. So with Vettel out front, he just kind of cruised off into the distance slowly but surely. And at that point, nothing much happened until pit stops, the first round of pit stops. The back markers came in early, try and get undercut on each other. Of the front runners, it was Vettel first to blink. He pitted on lap 15. Hamilton didn't pit until about 6 laps later, and he was losing about 2 seconds a lap on the undercut to Vettel. So he came out well behind Vettel when it was all said and done, having switched onto the mediums too to try and get onto the softs for the final stint. The big advantage for Hamilton was that Mercedes left Bottas out to hold up Vettel. And I think he was holding up something to the tune of like 2 or 3 seconds a lap. And it just shrunk that gap down to not quite nothing, but pretty well nothing. And Vettel had to make a hell of a pass on Bottas, fake left, go right down the front straight to get by him, using DRS and a little bit of craftiness to get by him there. And then that allowed Vettel to kind of stretch the gap again. He was on the better tires. And it was all looking pretty good for Ferrari. It looks like they were thinking about setting up a battle for the end of the race until a virtual safety car on lap 35 for Massa and Van Dorn. I told you I was going to get back to Van Dorn. Massa went up the inside of Van Dorn. They were basically alongside each other into turn 1. Van Dorn turned in, whapped himself on the side of Massa's car, broke his suspension, and he was out. They needed a virtual safety car to rescue Van Dorn's car in the gravel trap. Now, under VSC, Ferrari didn't pit. Mercedes brought in Hamilton. They dummied them one lap to see if they could get them in. Nope. And then on the next lap, Hamilton came in and switched to the softs. And then after the virtual safety car ended, Ferrari came in and switched Vettel onto the mediums. And that basically cost them the race because, when the virtual safety car came out, it was like a 7-second gap. And then he came out like right in front of Hamilton because Hamilton pitted under VSC and Ferrari stopped Vettel after VSC for some inexplicable reason. If you were going to change him after the VSC, okay, I guess you're responding to Hamilton, but why don't you just take the initiative? Because you're both going to be on the medium tires. You're going to have the fresher medium tires. Advantage you, right? But I guess that made too much sense. So Ferrari, okay, the undercut was a good idea for the first stop. It ended up would have worked out for them much better if Bottas didn't throw an almighty block on Vettel in that second stint. And then, the third stint, it was like, okay, we're just going to completely handicap ourselves. And then on lap 44, hashtag LH44, hashtag blessed, it was Lewis getting by just straight on DRS. DRS engine power. Phase 2 Mercedes engine certainly showed its strength right there against the Ferrari. Vettel didn't have a prayer. He couldn't answer it. And then just traffic and can't really follow in those cars, especially with Vettel being on the mediums and Lewis being on the soft. So it was basically race done there. Although before that, I should mention, Bottas retired for the first time this season. His engine gave up. While Hamilton and Bottas both had the second spec Mercedes engine at the start of the weekend, Bottas went back to the first spec. There's something not quite right with his second spec Mercedes engine, and it was probably the turbo that ended up giving out on Bottas's car. So that was his day done. That promoted Ricciardo up into third, the survivor of the top 6, I guess. Just lucked his way into the final podium spot. But yeah, from there it was day done for the race. Just everyone kind of held station, and that was it. Race over, GG, and Lewis Hamilton won the race by about 3 seconds over Vettel, as you can see on the screen, 3.5 seconds. And we've already gone down through the running order. Let's see, I'm trying to go through, think of anything else particularly interesting. Oh, Sainz and Magnussen had a pretty good battle coming out of the pits at one point. Sainz and Magnussen were released at basically the same time, so it wasn't like unsafe release. But Sainz decided he was going to try and pass Magnussen on the grass at pit exit and complained about being pushed off onto the grass. That's the second time this season that Sainz has tried something stupid coming out of the pit lane and blamed the other guy, hoping it'll work. And because nothing happened this time, Sainz didn't get a penalty, but boy, he should get a penalty just for being a bit of a whiner. But it was fair play to Magnussen. Magnussen finished 14th because he had to make an extra stop. He had a puncture after a dust-up with Kvyat at one point. So Kvyat lost his front wing end plate, and Magnussen lost his left rear tire in the exchange. So I think it was advantage Kvyat as he finished 9th. So here's the drivers' standings after 5 races. It's Sebastian Vettel leading Hamilton after just 5 races. It's going to be a battle between them until the finish, and Bottas, with his win, holds on to 3rd. Raikkonen didn't get any points. Ricciardo vaulted his teammate thanks to his podium finish. Perez and Ocon coming in 7th and 8th, and Massa and Sainz rounding out the top 10. So let's get on to the news. A lot of upgrades this weekend because we had the first European round of the season. All the teams bring basically not quite a B-spec car, but pretty damn close, a B-spec car to the Spanish Grand Prix. And Mercedes brought upgrades to bloody everything. They narrowed their front nose. They added turning vane skirts under the nose to try and direct air around the barge boards. You had scads of winglets added to the front of the car. More detail added to the barge boards and the rear floor, and they most importantly managed to lighten the car so it's just around that 728 kilo minimum weight. But the big deal is, and I talked about this during the race recap, is that Mercedes has their second iteration of the 2017 internal combustion engine turbocharger, MGU-K and MGU-H. Now, it hasn't significantly increased peak horsepower, but it allows them to maintain peak power over a longer period. So that is good for, I guess, race pace. Not that they had significantly better than race pace than the Ferrari, and the Ferrari didn't come with near as many upgrades, nor did it come with a big engine upgrade either. So that Ferrari still looks like, had they not screwed up the strategy, would have had the best of the Mercedes in terms of race pace. But again, we still haven't really seen a heads-up fight between Lewis and Seb this season. And maybe, just maybe, actually, even if they do have a chance for a straight-up fight at Monaco, you can't pass at Monaco. So qualifying, advantage Mercedes when we get to Monaco. Moving on to McLaren and Honda, there was a story in Autosport, and because it was behind their Autosport Plus paywall, I couldn't read the whole thing. So all I got was the one line that said, the current Honda power unit has less power than the power units that the team first got in 2015. Now, that doesn't look to be quite the case with this latest engine that Alonso had, because he was able to qualify 7th, but they were still underpowered by substantial margin in the early season. So you kind of wonder how good that McLaren chassis is if it actually had a real engine in there. But it makes you wonder, what's more impressive? How lacking in power Honda was at the start of the season, or how lacking in reliability Honda was, given they had no power in that engine at the start of the season? Like, they were targeting the final spec Mercedes power unit from 2016, and they didn't just miss that, they missed their starting point in 2015, if McLaren insiders to be believed. Now, Honda is supposed to be coming to Canada with an engine upgrade, and their target is to get them close to that preseason goal of being on par with last year's Mercedes. Of course, last year's Mercedes has moved on well beyond what they had at the end of last season, but don't tell them that. Let's just get to a starting point that they know they can match. Or, okay, they think they can match. I don't know they can match it. I'm not confident they can match it. An actual challenge to Mercedes proper is not going to happen in the next season. In German publication Amus Automotor und Sport, as we've mentioned before, they have suggested that Honda is looking at a completely new engine concept for 2018 as the best way forward. Of course, considering the failure that was 2017's new engine concept, I'm not sure that this is a good idea or a bad idea, because, well, obviously this engine concept isn't working, but their last attempt at implementing a new engine concept also failed spectacularly. It's not just Honda that is struggling with their engines, though. Renault's power unit upgrade has been pushed back. Originally, it was targeted for this weekend's Spanish Grand Prix. Then it was pushed back to the Canadian Grand Prix in June. And now, Amus is reporting that it may not be until July, and not till the end of July, that we get those new Renault engines in the back of the Red Bulls, Renaults, and Toro Rossos. And even then, they suggest that it's not the 0.3 of a second upgrade that had been targeted, but maybe only about 0.1 of a second. We've seen these Renault-powered teams struggling with power deficits and reliability woes all season, and it's left Red Bull, we were just talking about the championship gap, and now they have less than half the points that Mercedes does, and we're only 5 races into the season. It's like an 89-point gap there or thereabouts. The big issue for the Renault-powered teams is that this July upgrade leaves a high likelihood that you're only going to see it impact the final engine, maybe the final 2 engines of the season. We're already seeing Mercedes show up with their second iteration of the engine, and that's because they'll go back to the low-powered or high-use engine for Monaco next week, because you don't need a lot of power around Monaco, you need a lot of downforce. And then they'll have the second spec engine for Canada, for Azerbaijan, for Austria for Britain, that stretch there. That's when you really could use that engine upgrade. It's not an ideal situation for Red Bull, and I'm surprised we haven't heard them complain more about the lack of engine power and the lack of reliability. But maybe they can recover, but it's like 1/10 of a second isn't going to be anything at Belgium or Monza. So, I mean, those are going to just be Mercedes romps, let's be perfectly honest. And then if you're Ferrari, you're just going to come back and hopefully hold on through Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, and claw back there. All right, I've been talking about McLaren, Red Bull, Renault, Honda. That leads us perfectly into the driver market for 2017. Now that we've reached the quarter-way mark of the 2017 season, it's time for silly season rumors to come thick and fast. We've already been talking about Fernando Alonso and likely moving to Renault for 2018. Well, Alonso went on the record this weekend to say he's open to signing with any teams if McLaren is unlikely to challenge for races. So I guess his future at Woking sounds largely dependent on McLaren actually securing that hotly rumored Mercedes engine deal. For the moment, Alonso is most closely tied with a return to Enstone to go to Renault and partner with Nico Hülkenberg, replace Jolyon Palmer. Meanwhile, Helmut Marko was talking about Max Verstappen's contract. He says that his contract with Red Bull doesn't have a performance clause. So that means despite an underwhelming performance by Red Bull Renault this season, Max just can't opt out because of it. Red Bull has to release him from his contract if he wants to go to Ferrari in 2018. And that's probably not going to happen without a substantial buyout, even though his contract is expected to expire after the 2018 season. Still, if he can pick up a couple dollars for releasing someone who is expected to be a future world champion, you may as well take it. And hiring drivers is a top priority for Maranello in 2018. Both Vettel and Raikkonen are out of contract at the end of this season. Vettel reportedly has a pre-contract with Mercedes. Italian journalist Leo Turini was citing reports from the winter when Niki Lauda was telling friends that Vettel has signed a pre-contract with Mercedes for 2018. Vettel's had a competitive Ferrari this season, so I don't see him being as desperate as last season to jump out of the Scuderia. Now, Raikkonen, we've been talking about him being rumored to retire for years, so if this is the year, they need to find a way to replace him. We have been talking about they've been looking around at Carlos Sainz, they've been looking at Sergio Perez. I'm sure they would rather not have to pick up both of them at the same time. It's a possibility, unlikely, but it is a possibility that they would have to sign 2 new drivers for 2018, but I imagine they're going to want to try and keep one of them, and preferably Vettel. And finally today, Force India. The ongoing woes of Force India could be getting much worse. The Sahara Group, who are owners of 42.5% of the Sahara Force India Formula 1 team, are looking to sell their shares in the team. Sahara founder and chairman Subrata Roy is currently in legal hot water over money the group owes in terms of hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to investors. And in order to raise the money, the Sahara Group has been selling assets, and its Force India shares could be part of that sale. This parallels the legal woes of Vijay Mallya, the other owner of Force India, who also owns 42.5% of the team that I've previously documented on the podcast. Go back to the Australian Grand Prix episode for more. Mallya and his Kingfisher Group owes Indian banks over $1 billion. Now, back in 2011, Sahara paid $100 million for its share of Force India ownership, but F1 insiders don't think that Sahara is likely to get a positive return on investment for that 42.5% minority share of a midfield Formula 1 team, granted a 4th place midfield Formula 1 team. That's not helped by the fact that both of the team's major shareholders are basically being forced to sell their stake in the team. That being said, Autocar reports that if they can sell that chunk together, those 2 chunks, that 85% of Sahara Force India together, it could be worth up to £250 million, which would be a good return on investment for Sahara anyway. I think Mallya probably put in a bit more. There have been some parties sniffing around Force India over the last couple of years. Before their technical link-up with Red Bull, Aston Martin was rumored to be buying Force India and getting into Formula 1. Honda was briefly linked with buying Force India to create a Honda factory team. That might not be off the cards if they lose McLaren. The most recent interested group is called Project Brabham, a group of investors headed by former Formula 1 and sports car driver David Brabham. The Project Brabham group has been exploring launching a team in WEC under LMP2 or buying an F1 team that they would use to promote a Brabham supercar. Now, according to German publication Bild, one of the backers of Project Brabham is Bernie Ecclestone. Yes, that same Bernard Charles Ecclestone who was the Formula 1 Supremo up until this year. And that's the same Bernie Ecclestone who was Brabham's team boss for 15 years. But you'd have to think, given their ongoing success last season and this, it's going to be a matter of time before Force India finds a buyer. It's not like their Manor with their perpetual backmarkers, whereas Force India is actually a competitive outfit. So if somebody will buy them, it's just a matter of who will buy them. And that's it. That's all the Formula 1 news, rumors, and analysis for this week. Next time out, it's the Monaco Grand Prix from the streets of Monte Carlo. Probably a good day to be a Mercedes fan because they seem to have a lot of single lap pace. Although that Ferrari doesn't seem to be a slouch either, and you know Red Bull likes these tight, twisty circuits that don't rely as much on that Renault engine. But that's not for 2 weeks. And oh boy, in the interim, we gotta watch Fernando Alonso take practice in qualifying at the Indianapolis 500. If there's something noteworthy about that, I'll come back with a special podcast about Alonso's adventures in America. But probably not. I probably won't talk to you again for 2 weeks until after the Monaco Grand Prix, so thanks very much for joining me. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you're new, share on social media, follow on social media. The social media handle is Unsilent on Air, and that's for Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr. And until the next time, I'm Unsilent. Thanks very much for joining me. Like, share, subscribe, and we will see you next time.